So this contradiction in Macbeth and all these hallucinations and this guilt that's unraveling him certainly affects his marriage. So there's a couple things that I want to just point out briefly about the state of their marriage here in Act 3. I think we could probably say heading into Act 3, it seems like they're and while this maybe is a little bizarre to say, because they obviously do terrible things together, they do seem to have like a functionality in their relationship where they rely on each other. Macbeth certainly trusts Lady Macbeth. Lady Macbeth has like true goals for Macbeth, which align with his own goals. Together, they're able to mobilize to like do something that again is terrible, but is still like in keeping with their own ambitions. After the murder, it's interesting that Macbeth, as he plots to kill Banquo, does not include Lady Macbeth in that plot. When asked essentially what's on his mind, he says to her, "Be innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck," which you're welcome to borrow as a term of endearment for whoever your loved ones are. Why doesn't he include her in this? He probably wouldn't have killed Duncan if it wasn't for Lady Macbeth at his side. She's the one that says, "Screw your courage to the sticking place." She's the one who says, "We will not fail." She's the one who says, "Leave all the rest to me." And yet here, Macbeth doesn't involve her. And so the question, of course, is, well, why? Is there some positive spin we can put on it? Positive in that maybe Macbeth is like, hey, I've already damned myself so much with this murder, and I don't want you to have to face anything else. I don't want you to be even further implicated in all these terrible things. Or is there a loss of trust here, where he realizes he doesn't need to rely on her anymore? Or is it just, hey, I'm the king now, and I don't need you like I used to? And Lady Macbeth becomes relegated to the corner. And that kind of seems to maybe be the case by the end of the act, because instead of plotting with Lady Macbeth, like we saw at the end of Act 1, at the end of Act 3, Macbeth is going to the Weird Sisters, and they become now the primary source of advice and counsel, no longer Lady Macbeth. Lady Macbeth, instead, in Act 3, is just spinning around covering for him, right? She's the one who has to kind of mediate between the public's confusion and Macbeth's hallucinations. And so, because she kind of becomes a side character here, we actually won't see her in the play at all in Act 4. And that's going to be bizarre for us because she's been such a powerhouse and such an essential part of the plot so far. But in Act 3, her role in Macbeth's life maybe starts to wane, and then we don't see her at all. And in fact, this is the last time that we'll really see the two of them on the stage together, which is an interesting point to make heading forward. All right, before we do that, I want to point out this thing about sleep, because sleep is a really important idea for the Macbeths here. You'll remember in Act 2, Scene 2, as Macbeth, paranoid and anxious, comes out of the bedroom where Duncan has just been murdered, where he has just murdered Duncan, still holding the bloody knives. He says, "Methought I heard a voice cry, 'Sleep no more, Macbeth does murder sleep.'" And then he says, "The innocent sleep." So it's maybe not a surprise that by Act 3, again, still kind of paranoid and concerned, he says, "We've scorched the snake or scratched it. We've wounded it, not killed it. Shill, the snake will close and be herself, whilst our poor Malice remains in danger of her former tooth. But let the frame of things disjoint, both the worlds suffer, ere we will eat our meal in fear and sleep in the affliction of these terrible dreams that shake us nightly." Macbeth, in talking to his wife here, seems to suggest that he's having horrible nightmares. He's not able to sleep anymore. And the innocent sleep, Macbeth, of course, no longer innocent, can't sleep. And continuing the quote, he says, "Better be with the dead, whom we to gain our peace have sent to peace. To gain our peace, becoming king and queen, have sent to their peace, rest in peace, the death. That then on the torture of the mind to lie in restless ecstasy. Duncan is in his grave. After life's fitful fever, he sleeps well." Gives a bit of a different definition to that cliche, "I'll sleep when I'm dead." Macbeth is like, literally, Duncan is at peace, and he longs for that kind of peace, but he doesn't see that kind of peace happening to him now. Because of this guilt, he's been all shaken up. So at the very end, then, sorry, this is a little cut off on the left, Macbeth makes up his mind that he's going to go to the Weird Sisters. "More shall they speak, for now I am bent to know by the worst means the worst. For mine own good, all causes shall give way. I am in blood stepped in so far that should I wade no more, returning were as tedious as go over. Strange things I have in my head that will to hand, which must be acted ere they may be scanned. Macbeth here says, all right, I'm going to the Weird Sisters. I'm going to find out by the worst. Whatever the worst is, I need to know it. And the Weird Sisters are the ones that he thinks will tell him that. What he recognizes here, though, is a point of return. And this line, I am stepped in blood so far. Should I wade no more, returning were as tedious as gore? What he's saying is, I'm in like, I picture like a river, like the Delaware River, but it's blood. And you're like halfway across the river to Jersey. And it's like, well, what do you do? Because it's just as hard to keep swimming and hit the other shore as it is to turn back and head back to Pennsylvania. And he says, look, I'm in the middle of this thing. And so one way or the other, I got to do a lot of work, either to come back or to keep going. And Macbeth's decision here is to keep going. And this is a turning point. Like, he could turn back. He could again say, hey, I don't have to keep murdering. I don't have to keep being bloody. I don't have to keep being vengeful. And yet he's committed to continue. Lady Macbeth says, you lack the season of all natures, sleep, right? Which was at the core of what we just discussed. He can't sleep because he's so guilty. He concludes, come will to sleep. My strange and self-abuse is the initiate fear that wants hard use. We are yet but young indeed. And that last line is Macbeth saying there's still a lot of bad stuff to do. We are young indeed. Well, what are the deeds you've committed so far? Murdering Duncan, murdering Banquo. And he says, we're not done. We're barely started. We've just begun. We are newly born into this kind of lifestyle. So with all of those murderous thoughts and hallucinations and fractures in his marriage, now Macbeth is going to head to the Weird Sisters, who will confuse him more in their paradoxical and ambiguous prophecies, which we'll look a little bit more at next module.